We're talking today with Al Johnson of Hudsonville, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, Mr. Johnson, can you start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself? Where and when were you born, for instance?
Well, okay, I was born in Columbus, Ohio on the 5th of July of 1923. I was born into a family that was regular Army. Father was regular Army. He traveled to various places and we went to various cities with him. He was an ROTC instructor. He finally, during the height of the prosperity before the Depression, he got out of the service thinking he was going to do well in the open market, but Depression hit and we hit with it. And we moved to various places, including my first memory is of Allegan, Michigan, and from there we moved to Holland, Michigan and stayed in several places, finally ending up in Grand Rapids.
Now, did your father, did he go back into the Army or was he doing other work?
No, he was doing other work. He finally got, well, when the war started, he finally got into the war industries and making things like that. So he never went back into the service. But we had two boys and a girl in the family. My older brother went in first and he became a combat engineer. And then I joined after being drafted and went down to Texas and went through medical school and became a scrub nurse. I thought I might as well get all the education I could in the situation I was in and then get out of it.
Okay, let's back up the story here a little bit. You said you're basically in the Grand Rapids area at the time the war starts?
Yeah.
Do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yeah, we were over visiting my aunt who had a farm out here north of Holland, and we visited them and heard on the radio there that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, which to me meant very little at that time, but I think it meant a lot to the parents. But then, of course, going back to where I was, I got in the service.
Well, I was actually going to, let's just fill in a little bit more here. You said your brother entered the service before you did. Was he drafted or did he?
Yes,
okay.
He was drafted, right. We were both drafted.
And was he drafted in 42 then, or you think?
I imagine, I would say probably in 41. He was 2 years older than I was.
But was he drafted before Pearl Harbor, do you think?
No, okay. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. Then you kind of run out of 41 because December 7th is
right.
Okay. But anyway, a little before you. All right. Now, before Pearl Harbor, had you been paying any attention to the events in the world, like the war in Europe or that kind of thing?
Well, as much as a 16 or 17-year-old would pay attention to anything like that, thinking it was somewhere else and not on our own doorstep.
Right.
So as far as having any emotional trauma from that, no. It was one of the things that happened. I had more important things to think about, like baseball and girls.
Sure. Now, were you in high school at the time?
I was in high school at the time, right.
Okay. And did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from high school, right, in 1942. I was about a year behind because I had some credits to make up from the previous year, and it extended me till February of 42, which I then graduated in June.
Okay. Once you graduated, what did you do?
I went to work in a factory over in Muskegon, and I hated it. Then I hated factory work anyway.
Well, what kind of factory were you in?
It was a factory that made gaskets, I suppose, for some military application. And I worked with a chemist, and we made gaskets. That's about the best I can offer.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so then when you got your draft notice on some level, maybe you weren't that disappointed?
Not particularly. Because I was from a family that moved a lot, so moving was not a big issue. Making new friends was not a big issue. I never could keep a friend because they didn't exist for that length of time to become close. So we moved, and I was happy to go. Why not? Something new.
All right. And when you did get drafted, where did you report to first?
Oh, Fort Custer.
Okay.
Where everyone else reported through from there. And then I went to Abilene, Texas.
All right.
From there.
And then did you stay in Abilene for basic training?
Basic training, right. And then went to San Antonio. in the big Army hospital there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in the basic training, how well did you adjust to what they were doing in basic training?
I loved it. I loved the service, right? I loved the regimentation, and I loved all that part of it. And I probably should have stayed in, but what happens is not always what you plan.
Now, did you have a better idea of what to expect than a lot of the other draftees?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
It just suited you.
It just suited me, right? And I was willing to adapt because I've always adapted my whole life.
Had you done ROTC or anything like that in high school?
No, I didn't. No,
Okay.
I was. There were too many other activities that I had to be involved in. That wasn't one of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you go to basic training. Okay, then you go down. You go into your Army hospital.
Right.
Okay.
I gather all the information I can from that. I became a scrub nurse. I wasn't going to be a bedpan jockey. So that stood me in well when I came to the OSS because they needed specialties. They had medics, they had radio operators, they had demolition men, they had machine gunners. They had all these special talents, and that stood me in well.
Okay. Now, how long did you spend in the Army hospital doing your nursing training?
Well, it was probably 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when you completed that, what did you do next?
Well, then we were shipped up to Denver in a holding camp. And that means that anybody could pick you up. And that's fortunately where the OSS had a notice on the bulletin board. And I read that and got right in line. And they said it was hazardous duty, short life expectancy. And I thought, well, that's something that ought to be entertaining.
Okay.
Right. So I got in line, and I was friendly with the first sergeant there, so that made it easier for me to be put to the top of the list.
Well, how long did you actually spend in Denver?
Probably no more than a couple of months.
Okay, but long enough to make connections. And was this a center for all kinds of recruits?
For all kinds of recruits, right. It was a holding camp, which everybody was kind of dumped into there, and then
Okay. And roughly when were you there?
November and December. Yeah.
Okay. Of 43 or?
43, right.
Okay. So now, did most people going in there move out faster? I mean, if they were regular infantry types, would they
Well,
go
I
out faster?
think, yeah, depends on what was needed, you know, what was needed. Fortunately, I wasn't needed, but I would imagine that someone with a degree in scrub nursing would probably have been popular somewhere. Maybe a field hospital or
Right.
or even one in the States, which would have been very dull living.
Yeah.
But I was willing to transfer out of there by one means or another, but you could only transfer up, so I had only 2 places to go. Medics were the third in rank as far as popularity is concerned. You could either go to the Air Force or you could go to the paratroopers, so I was willing to go one or the other.
All right. So you're there, you're waiting, you get the chance to sign up with the OSS.
Yes.
Once you do that, what happens next?
Well, once we were accepted, and I understand the FBI even came around locally to check you out to make sure you were all American, and I'd eaten my Wheaties every morning, and then we were told that we were accepted, and we were shipped to Washington D.C. We stayed at the Congressional Country Club, which was our home base, which was nice living, and from there we took our basic OSS training.
Now, what does that consist of?
Well, that consists of, they had a mock C-47 up about 6-8 foot in the air, and we practiced jumping out of that,
Okay.
landing and rolling. You had a certain roll, you know, ankle, knee, shoulder,
Right.
hip and shoulder, and that sort of thing. So we learned that. We also learned demolition. We learned compass reading. We learned. We didn't learn small arms there. We went to Camp David for that. We, of course, physical training. We had we drove we ran 5 miles every morning before breakfast, and then had calisthenics, and so it was rigorous training. And even though this slight, slim body of mine had a lot of grit on it, I guess, because I was able to keep up with the other boys.
How many people were you training alongside, do you think?
Probably, I'd say 150.
Okay,
Yeah.
substantial number. And what kind of profile did they have? What sort of backgrounds did they have?
Well, most of them were, well, in the French group, which I'm familiar with because I was in the French group, most of them, I'd say about 90% were of French Canadian origin.
Okay.
A lot of through the northeastern states, Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire and northern New York. They had, you know, osmosis between the borders, and so there's a lot of that was of that background. So the rest of us who had special training, like medics, even though I couldn't speak French,
Right.
I had a special training that I would utilize. But with 90% of us spoke the French language, and I say most of the Italians that were in the group, I think they were all of Italian background around Pittsburgh area, and they all spoke Italian. So that was not a problem for them. The Norwegians, most of them were up in the northwestern area, and they had a Scandinavian
Right.
background to them. And the Balkans, there were some Greeks. That was kind of a mixed up group. The Greeks and the Yugoslavians and that sort of thing, and they constituted the Balkan groups. But
Had most of the men been to college, or were they
not
like you?
necessarily. Some were. I know one was a teacher. We called him professor. But he was a teacher before he got in. The rest of them, I think, were just run-of-the-mill American kids. Right off the block, right off the market. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, how long did you spend in Washington doing this?
Well, let me see. Probably 4 or 5 months.
Okay. Now, did you get much of a chance to go off and do
Oh, yeah.
things?
To see the. You mean to visit?
Yeah. Visit, carouse, whatever else it was that one did.
Yeah, we had we had dates with several of the girls who worked in the Pentagon. I can show you the picture of my wife, you know. But yeah, we got out just about every night, and we'd go to little places like Cabin John, which was in Maryland, and you know, have a riotous, in the course of riotous living.
Right. Now, how much of a contrast was this from sort of what you were used to back home?
Well, of course, obviously it was quite a contrast because, you know, well, my wife's got the phone.
Okay.
I hope. Shoot. Shut it off.
All right.
You're going to edit that, aren't you? Where were we?
Okay, we're talking about kind of life in Washington there in early
Yeah.
'44.
Well, we spent a lot of time. We didn't always get into Washington itself because that was a bit of a ride. We didn't have trucks to bring us. We had to use cabs.
Yeah. So where was this country club where you were staying? Was that up in Maryland or was it down in Virginia?
Yeah, Congressional Country Club.
Yeah.
You know that they play the Congressional there, golf there. That's let me see, probably a little west or north of Washington. I think probably 8-9 miles.
So up in Maryland rather than down in
That was
Virginia.
Maryland, right? It's
Okay.
in Maryland, yeah. Yeah, that's where the congressmen live now, or have their frivolities. And but we blew up the whole course with either hand grenades or demolitions or something, because that's what we're learning.
Right.
And then we had, of course, further training at Camp David. It wasn't Camp David at that time. It wasn't Camp David till Eisenhower
Right.
pronounced it as such. But we stayed in that area anyway. That was considered Camp David. We learned further details on weaponry.
Were you mostly dealing with sort of the smaller arms, pistols, carbines,
Well,
things like that, or?
Yes. Well, okay. Now we're getting into France, and for the reason for being there. Do you want that now?
Well,
Well,
I'm asking about the training you got at that
okay.
time.
Okay, we had training in sidearms, rifle, carbine, Thompson submachine gun, 30 caliber machine gun, 50 caliber water-cooled machine gun, bazookas, and a 3-inch mortar. That was the
Okay.
largest of our weaponry. And that's what, 80 millimeter?
Yeah, the
Like
81 millimeter
80
mortar was the standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the largest weapon.
Okay.
But you see, we couldn't carry anything more.
Right.
Well, we were,
Even carrying a mortar might have been interesting.
well, that was carried in 3 pieces, so
Mhm.
3 guys shared the burden there, shared the load there, so.
All right. Now, once you were, I guess, who was giving you the training for these different things you were doing, whether
Well,
in the field or at the
there were people, men who had either been in combat or were expertise in certain types of weaponry.
Mhm.
Of course, we had to field strip every piece of weapon we had, blindfolded.
Mhm.
Field strip and reassemble blindfolded, because that was part of the prerequisite, in case we were having to do it in the middle of the night sometime.
Were you also, including back at your regular training area, were you getting things that were more connected to actual espionage work of one kind or another? Or were you just getting more general physical training and weapons training?
Yeah, well, yeah, not espionage work, because our main function was to harass and destroy and make it difficult for the enemy to process or to proceed with what they're doing. Ambushing was our main source of attack.
Okay, so you were training essentially in guerrilla warfare and that
Guerrilla
kind
warfare,
of thing. Yeah.
that's right. We worked with the French underground, and they were experts in guerrilla warfare, and of course, getting into France, we furnished them with all the weaponry they need.
Okay, so once you complete your training there in Washington, you're kind of getting into the late spring of '44, still
Yeah.
before D-Day.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
That's
and then,
right.
and then where do you go next?
we'll go to Africa.
Okay, how did they get you to Africa?
Oh boy, on one of these Liberty ships. Kaiser built a Liberty ship. This thing rocked even at the dock. This thing was ugh, even at the dock. That was an experience. We went in a convoy, of course, at about 9 knots an hour, which was very slow moving, but you can only go as fast as the slowest ship.
Right.
But there were some rare experiences. You don't want to hear about those, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, seasickness never bothered me, but it bothered a lot of people. But when we'd go for meals, we only had 2 meals a day, one in the middle of the morning and middle of the afternoon. But we'd stand on large tables, and you'd have a tray. And I don't want to be too demonstrative, but the ship would rock this way and that way, and when someone would regurgitate, it's a kind word,
Yep.
then you'd pick your tray up and let it slide that way, put it down, and quick eat, and pick it up and let it go the other way. Always want to make sure you get in the middle of the table, so you don't have any overflow.
Right.
And yeah, that was interesting in that sense. There was other aspects of that. The toilet facilities were built in the same manner, in which if you didn't get in the middle bowl, stool, you got in the end stool, and you got yourself laundered.
Yeah.
Putting it mildly.
What part of the ship were you bunked in?
Oh, that was it didn't. I'm not too bright, but it didn't take me long to figure out if you're on the top bunk, nothing is going to spill onto you.
Right.
So I got the top bunk, right up near the ceiling.
Okay.
It
Now,
was
were
the
you?
hottest place. But
Yeah. Were you below the waterline? Do you think where you
oh
were?
no,
or-
I don't. Well, we could have been. Yeah, we could.
But you were
have
in
been
the
below.
hold of the hull, in the hull of the
yeah,
ship.
the hull. Yeah, we could have been below the waterline. Yes,
Okay.
at that time. Yeah.
Okay. And were you toward the middle of the ship or toward the bow or the stern? You may not remember that, but
No, I can't remember. I just know I was the top bunk because I wasn't going to be puked on. So
now, did you hit any bad weather when you went across, or just
no, we
regular
didn't hit no bad weather going. We had bad weather coming back from England, but that was
later on?
later on, right?
Okay. Did you have any U-boat scares while you were crossing?
Well, no, but then there's always the scare. They say, well, we have destroyer escorts in this, but hey, when you're 18, you don't think of those dumb things.
It was more a question of, were there alerts in the crossing? Did you hear depth charges blowing up?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't recall that.
Yeah.
No.
Well, by that stage in the war, the anti-submarine warfare side was winning. There weren't as
Sure.
many U-boats
There
out
weren't
there.
many. No,
You
that's
might well
right.
not have been bothered at all.
That's right.
Okay. Now, when you got across North Africa, where did you land?
We landed in Casablanca. Always wanted to go to the Casbah, but it was off limits to us. But I could just see Spencer Tracy there with Katharine Hepburn, and you know, in a mysterious place. But we couldn't go there. We had to put ourselves on 40 and 8 boxcars. That's 40 men and 8 horses.
Right.
Right, and we were crammed into those. I think there was probably more than 40 men in one boxcar. But we went from there to Algiers, through the Atlas Mountains and across the plains and et cetera. And it took us, I don't know how many days, but we were having a good time in spite of it all.
Well, how would you have a good time riding in a boxcar?
Well, it was sufficient amount of wine, bread, and cheese that was available at every stop.
Ah,
All
okay.
right, and of course, the officers said, "Now, when we come to these stops, I don't want any of you men off these boxcars." Well,
Right.
right. So we beat them to the beer, wine, and cheese.
Well, you had a bunch of guys who could speak French too, so
That's right.
Had to have been that much easier.
Well, it was easy. Anyway, that's the part of the past I don't want my kids to understand. But anyway, we got to Algiers, and we stayed in a little city called Guayaquil, which was east of Algiers. And at that point, we took our parachute training. There we had some more physical training to take, of course, which was to condition us, and we flew out over the Mediterranean.
All right. The parachute training part, how did that go?
Well, it was interesting. It was exciting. You know, the first time you don't know what's happening, so you have no fear. It's the second time that you decide that, whoop, this could happen or that could happen, right? But no, everything went well except one man got caught up in the risers with his feet upside down. Of course, we all carried a knife on our inside of our leg so the risers wouldn't catch them, but he pulled his knife out and sliced off a half a dozen risers, and his feet fell down, so he's landed safely. Came down a little faster than the rest of us, but he was okay. That was the only bad experience that we had.
So the training you had about how to roll and all of that kind of thing actually worked?
That all worked. That all did fine, right.
Okay. How many jumps did you take in training? Do you remember?
5.
Okay.
5 jumps in training in Africa, 5 jumps with the English commandos, and 2 jumps in combat. No, I'm sorry, 6 jumps with the English, and I had 2 jumps in combat, which made 13 altogether.
All right. Now, once you kind of completed that training, then what mission were you assigned there from North Africa?
Well, then from that point we were shipped to England.
Okay.
The French group, 50 of us, were shipped to England and stayed at the Brock Hall, which was a manor house owned by Lord and Lady Thornton, which now has become an OSS museum. And we stayed there and did whatever you did. Well, one of the trainings we had called the House of Death, which was a large building that they taught us how to take the life of other people. Ghastly, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what war does.
That's what happens, yeah. But anyway, that was located at Brock Hall, and I have literature on that downstairs.
Now, were British commandos training you at this time, or does that come later?
No, that was all squeezed in there through, other activities. We spent time. Harrington Field, I believe it was, is where the British had their commando training unit, and we took English parachute training, which was out of a balloon. Well, the reason for that is because when we jumped into France, we jumped out of B-24 bombers.
Mhm.
They took the ball turret out of the bottom and overlaid that with a plywood so we wouldn't fall in.
Mhm.
And then those were removed, and that's how we parachuted out of the ball turret on the bottom of the B-24. But then we took parachute training in England from the English out of a balloon. There was 5 of us in a
Mhm.
basket, and they'd cable us up about 1,000 feet, and then we'd exit that way. It was interesting because there was no wind stream
Mhm.
and no sound,
Right.
and suddenly you'd look up and there's the parachute open,
Mhm.
fortunately. But they always told us, don't worry fellas, if it doesn't open, you can bring it back and we'll give you another one.
Right.
It was very jolly of them, you know.
Yep. Okay. Now, at what point do you find out what your job is going to be?
Well, we witnessed the armadas flying over for D-Day, and we knew something was happening.
Right.
We didn't know at that point when we saw all these airplanes.
Mhm.
We thought, boy, they're going to get it today. But then it wasn't too long after that. Then some of the 50 were broken into smaller groups, and they were sent here, there, and everywhere. And we were finally in August. They came and said, "You're ready to go."
Now, how many men were you with at this point?
25.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I should qualify that.
Mhm.
There was probably about 15 of us French and some Norwegian. Now they were in on that because they were going to go into Norway, and they wanted to get an idea before they went into Norway, I guess. So there were 25, probably 10 Norwegians in that group. I had a good friend in that who was killed finally in Norway. When they were exiting their airplane, they were killed, all of them. So they never did anything in Norway, but they were all ski troopers as well. So there were probably about 15 of us in France of the French extraction.
Okay. Who was in charge of the group that you were with?
Captain John Cook, sound like the pirate. Captain John Cook. Yeah, he had charge, and he was a good friend. I enjoyed Cookie, we called him Cookie.
Do you know anything about what his background was?
No, I don't know. No.
Was he a little
Well,
older?
he was probably 40 years old.
Okay, so he's older than the rest
Yeah,
of
he
you
was.
guys.
He was an old man, compared to 18, 19-year-old.
right.
Yeah, he was the age of your father. So,
All right. And then, so I guess you got your group, you're going to go into France, and then how do they prepare you for that, for going in? Or what did you know before you went in?
well, very little. We knew what we were going to take. We had to take a hydroelectric plant at Aiguezone, which was on a large river, and it was a good-sized hydroelectric plant. But that was needed because the southern invasion of France was going to utilize electricity produced by the hydroelectric plant at Aiguezone. And so we had to capture it intact and operational. So our main objective, and the first thing we did within the first week, was to make sure we captured that hydroelectric plant. And we had a Colonel Oblinsky with us who was not part of our group, but I guess he wanted some combat time. So he went in with us. He finally left us soon after that plant was taken. So Captain Cook was really the main honcho. But they told us we had to take the electric plant, and that was up to us to know how to do it.
Okay.
To figure out how to do it. So of course we had the French underground that received us and housed us, and and bed and breakfast us the whole time there. So we had information from them as to where it was and what it was, what the problems existed. We were told it was all surrounded by landmines, which actually it wasn't. It was good that we had false information there. But we were able to negotiate a settlement with the help of the French underground, the Nationalist French Army, the OSS, and we were able to get them out of there without firing a shot.
All right. Now, was that stuff that played out after you got into France?
Yep.
Okay.
After we got
Let's so take us through the process of going over and landing and meeting the resistance and kind of follow the story.
Okay, well, when we first got our orders to go, we went up to Harrington Field. We got in a British Halifax bomber, and those are big lunkers. And we took off, and an engine got on fire, and we came back. The second time we couldn't get off the ground. So then they switched us over to B-24s and put 5 of us in each one. And going over, it was quite interesting. I was able to listen to the BBC. They had a lot of classical music, which I like. And so I had earphones on from from the radio operator and was listening to that as we were. And suddenly they're firing their machine gun. Oh, shoot. They're attacking us. No, they're just practicing to make sure the guns fire over the channel. So when we got in over land, we're supposed to come in at 1,000 feet. It takes about 150 feet for the parachute to open. It gives you a little chance to orient yourself before you hit the ground. But we came in at 1:20 in the morning at 500 feet because the pilot was a little off. And there was 5 of us B-24s. 3 of us got in at 1:20 in the morning at 500 feet. So we only had about that much time, and you're on the ground. Next night, the other 2 found us, and they had bonfires in a certain pattern on the ground to make sure that the pilots understood that pattern. There was a code signal, etc., so they knew where they were rather than being jumped into the Germans. But we jumped about 5 miles from the Germans. So excuse me, I'll close the windows.
Okay. Now, what happened actually when you hit the ground? You jump out to 500 feet. There's sort of 3 of you together. At least you find each other. You land. And
but the French were there to receive us.
Okay, so
the French were there to receive us. As a matter of fact, when I landed, some guy come over the top of me, and I thought, oh, this is not a hiney, is it? So I pulled out my 45. No, it wasn't necessary. He says, hey, don't. I'm your friend. We're here to receive you. So they found all of us. We jumped within probably half a mile of each other, and not of each other, of the whole stick. And so they wrapped up all of our parachutes, and the French ladies took the parachutes because they were going to use the material for undergarments, which they had a great need for and lacked because of the economy. I suppose.
Their rationing was a lot worse than in the U.S. because the Germans took everything.
Exactly right. So they were able to take all that away from us, which was fine. Then we all assembled in a woods. We got everybody assembled in a woods, and then they from that first night in the woods, then we went to a barn, and of course we were in French trucks. Well, there were probably German trucks that were stolen by the French. So, as a matter of fact, we even stole a Jeep, what they marketed in America for the Thing.
Right, the Kubelwagen.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we had one of those at our disposal. So then we went to a barn at Les Blancs, and then went various places. I can't tell you all of them. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Basically, you basically stay inside during the day, and they move you at night, or how did it work?
Yeah, we moved at night. Yeah, right, inside during the day until. Well, we had sent out patrols. We had. I went on several of them with Captain Cook to see if we could find Germans or see what the lay of the land was.
Right.
Because we had to, outside of take the hydroelectric plant, we had to continually report information to them regarding German installations or German movements, troop movements, and that sort of thing.
Okay. Did you have your own radio with you?
We had our own radio, right.
Okay.
Right, it was the old coffee grinder, right, which you had to grind and grind and grind,
To generate the power?
That was the power, yeah. Yeah, and of course we had to move quite often because of the radio, because they could zone in on us, right?
Did you have a sense that there were very many Germans in the area, or just a small security force?
Small, I'd say small security force, except when they bringing the troops back from southern France to the fatherland. There were some good sized movements then of troops and.
Because they were now. On what date did they land you?
August 12th.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's right about at the same time as the landing in southern France.
That's right, exactly, right.
And also the Normandy breakout is happening at that point too.
Yeah, Anvil, no, Dragoon, I guess it was, yeah. Okay, that was hard to remember all these things, you know.
Yep. That's why you have historians along to go check them up later. But yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's that right. All going on pretty much at the same time.
That's right, yeah.
So it's a moment when the Germans are going to have to change what they're doing and do it pretty
Right.
quickly.
They had to do it quickly, right, and they moved large amounts of troops too. Let me see. We captured the city of Argenton, and we captured the city. We blew up bridges and felled trees over roads and that sort of thing, which to the great hilarity of the French people, because they knew the Germans wouldn't come back in, but they did make it into Argenton, and they did kill the mayor and a few of the city officials, but by and large we were out of their hair most of the time. You know?
And at what point in this process then do you actually get to the hydroelectric plant?
Well, it was done about a week after we got there, so that was taken first, and and of course that was then we located the people that used to run it. So all the expertise was there yet. They just they were kicked out, but now we brought them back in and.
So had they been replaced by Germans?
By Germans, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And
who I'm sure were able to do everything perfect.
Now the Germans had just gone by themselves, or
Wherever they went, they went. I don't know. We didn't bother running after them.
okay.
No.
Now you mentioned a little earlier that you managed to arrange this so you took the place without a fight.
That's right.
Who was there when you got there? Or was anyone there when you got there?
Oh yeah, I think there was probably a company of soldiers there, and I think a lieutenant was the head of it, so he was not of high rank. But then at that point, they didn't need anything. They weren't expecting American. They weren't expecting a lot of resistance. What French resistance they had was probably maybe what you see in the movies or something, but not to a great extent because they didn't have the weaponry. We furnished that.
Right.
We had large containers that came in with us of weapons.
Right. Were the soldiers at the plant, were they French soldiers or German?
No, they were German.
They were German,
Yeah,
okay.
they were German soldiers.
Now, were they there when you got there?
They were there. They went with everything but their bed bugs. Cause we were gonna, boy, this was gonna be nice. We'll stay in this nice German camp. When we saw the red menace there, we said, boy, there's nothing better than a good old haystack to sleep in. So we ransacked what we could out of the barracks. And
Now, did the Germans surrender or just withdraw?
no, they withdrew. They were gone overnight. We were there that day, and we said, you have till tomorrow to either go or you're going to be fired upon. By the morning, they were gone. So we were happy for that because there's nothing, no need for spilled blood or lose life.
So basically, you just managed to convince them to leave?
Yeah.
Now, did they have any idea how few of you there were, or?
No, but because we had Colonel Obolensky with us, I suppose they figured there might be quite a contingent of Americans.
Right.
With a rank of a colonel there. But no, there was, it was just, I probably had more than 50 or 60 people altogether, including the French.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So they politely leave.
They politely leave, right?
All right. And then you're able to secure it, and then.
So when we secured it, we continued its operation, and of course we put up a guard around it, so like a perimeter, so to make sure that that thing could be kept that way. But in that area of France, anyway, most of the troops were up north fighting.
Right.
And so what we had were probably, maintenance people.
You'd maybe, yeah, and the Germans also would assign older people or invalids
Yeah.
or people who've been injured
Right.
already in the Russian front, and they would
Right.
give them some of those rear area duties as well.
Right. Yeah.
And so you were not up against the SS at that point.
No, not at that point, but we did run into them.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a large convoy that came up from southern France, and we got wind of it, of course, and so we set up an ambush, and we had probably 1,200 French underground with us, and of course we were interspersed between all the French there, and there was a good battle at that point, and but none of us, no one was wounded. Of course, obviously, no one was killed at that particular point. Yeah,
Or at least you weren't.
that's right. That's right. I wasn't. I walked down a hedgerow with Captain Cook before the Germans arrived to make sure everything was good. All the troops were in line and everything was good. And when they arrived, one of the French had a bazooka, and apparently they sent a bicycle as a vanguard for a troop train, and they took him out with a bazooka, and he was all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. But when he hit, then of course everything opened up, and Captain Cook and I took off for the back along the hedgerow, running as fast as we could. I think I beat the captain. But yeah, that was a big battle.
Now, did the Germans eventually push through and keep on going? Or?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you know what you harass. Okay, so you can't win a fight. You can't win a war.
Right.
All you do is throw everything that you can at them, and within a half an hour or 45 minutes, you're done.
You force them to stop.
Then
deploy.
force them to stop, deploy. Right, it slows them down, and you get rid of a few vehicles in the process, and then you're gone.
Right.
You disappear into the woods. Okay, so that's what happened to us.
Now, did any Germans then come after you after that ambush?
No, I don't think they knew where we were. They would never come after the French either, because the French would disappear. They'd be doing their job, their duty. We stayed. Three of us got lost to the group after that because we didn't get all the information as to where we were going to meet. So the three of us, only one speaking French, got sidetracked, and we crossed the road that the Germans were coming on and slept in the woods. I don't know how we ever got there. Then when we came back, we in the next morning, we found a barn, but it was the barn that was under attack when we were fighting them, so we slept in their hayloft, and apparently Captain Cook thought we must have gotten killed, so he'd come back looking for us. And when we heard English-speaking voices out of the hayloft, then we knew we were all right. So, yeah.
Right. Now, how long did this phase go on? How long did you stay in that area?
Stayed about 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did American forces eventually show up, or?
No. We were told that we had to come out because our job was secured, and the German troops were moving, and our troops were coming up.
Right.
But we never saw them.
So how did you get out?
Well, apparently the Germans used small fields in that area to refuel their planes, what planes they had left, and we captured one of the fields. Only held it temporarily till the C-47s came in to pick us up, and then we took off, and I don't know what the underground did with the Germans that were protecting the field. We weren't worried about that. We were in the air. So, man, we couldn't fly on a regular flight because we didn't exist, you know that. So we had to fly in under the radar.
Now, when you were you there in uniform?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, the Geneva Convention required that, as much as they would honor the Geneva Convention.
Right.
But anyway, if we weren't in uniform, we would have been shot as spies. But we, in a sense, were spies, but we were in uniform to protect us from the Geneva Convention, right?
Now, were there other people that you trained with who did get captured and survived, or?
I think some of the Italians did, but I'm not familiar with who it was. I didn't know too many of the Italians. Of course, all the Norwegian group was, they were wiped out before they got to the ground, right? And, but no, our men were all good. We're all okay, yeah.
Okay. Now, did they take you back to England at that point?
Yeah, we went back, we flew over the English Channel about 200 feet, and then up over the White Cliffs of Dover. That was interesting. And under the radar as much as we could, because we'd have been shot down as unidentified aircraft. So then we landed back at Harrington Field and then motored back to Brock Hall.
Okay. So about when then did you get back there? September or?
Yeah, it must have been, we got, probably about the end of September we got out of France and back to England. And then it wasn't, we all volunteered for China, so then we were packed up and shipped by boat.
Okay. You volunteer for China. How does that come about?
Well, it was, we were told that you can either volunteer for China or you can be put back in the regular army. And so we said we're all volunteer. Right? We didn't want to split up the group.
Right.
Right. So we all volunteered to go to China. You know, it was another phase. And of course, then we came home. We had a 30-day furlough after we got home, which brought us through the month of December. But I couldn't tell the folks anything. So they didn't know what I was doing, and I couldn't tell them what I was doing or where I'd been or where I intend to be. So it was kind of a difficult furlough. It was so difficult that I left a week early, went back to camp. I thought that was the safest place to be. So.
Where was your camp at that point?
That was Congressional Country Club.
Okay, so back at that same
back to the
place.
Congressional, yeah.
All right. And then at what point do you ship out to China?
Well, right after that, we took after we got back, probably the first part of January, we got aboard a train and went to Camp Pendleton, California, which is the Marine base there.
Right.
And from that point, then I don't know how long we stayed. I couldn't have stayed there many weeks. And then we went to San Diego on board ship and went over to Bombay, which is now Miramar or something, isn't it?
No. Burma is Myanmar.
Oh.
Bombay is Mumbai.
Mumbai, okay.
Yeah.
I went to Bombay anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, ship. What kind of ship were you on this time?
Well, it was a regular transport, a regular cruise ship.
Okay, so a passenger ship.
It was a passenger ship. Good thinking. It was a passenger ship, right? It was quite nice. Yeah, we were down in the lower hold, though. I think about as low as you can get underwater, and but it wasn't necessary for us to do any of the slave labor aboard ship because we were combat troops, and the rest were all first timers, I think.
Okay. Were a lot of the other service personnel and things like that, or just new recruits?
I think they were all new recruits that were going over to CBI, yeah. So we had a nice place, but the fortunate part of this was, I shouldn't tell all these things. Fortunate part of being on that ship was that we were right near the hold that stored all the food. And of course the cooks would come down there and we'd help them. Naturally we'd help them. And we'd sidetrack. I tell you, Vienna sausage and fruit cocktail. We had our fill between meals, which weren't too often. That ship housed 5,000 troops, so we didn't eat too often, except on our own volition.
Now, how long did this trip take, do you think?
Well, it took us. We had to zigzag a lot. It took us almost 30 days.
Were you sailing by yourself, or did you have escorts?
Yeah, by ourselves. Yeah. They said, "Oh, this ship is fast. You don't have to worry about we can outrun a submarine." But I said, "Well, how about running into a submarine? How do you outrun someone who's waiting for you?" But anyway, we made it. Went as far as.
Did you stop any place along the way, or you just?
We went as far as south as Melbourne and well, Hawaii, but we couldn't see any of it. They wouldn't. We didn't stop there. We said hi, and ended up in Bombay. got aboard train again, traveled to Calcutta.
Okay, so you're taking a train trip across northern India at that point.
Bombay to Calcutta, yeah.
So what was that like?
That was hideous. The people were so poor, it was just pathetic. And you felt sorry for them. What thing you could do, of course, they all wanted bakshi's, they'd climb up you had to almost fight them off the train when it stopped, because they'd steal you blind. And you couldn't blame them, but we'd give them what we could. We gave them chocolate. We had, of course, the issue of chocolate,
right,
which I didn't like, so it was nice to get rid of. And but that was a long, tedious, difficult trip, because when you witness the poorness of the people, couldn't believe it.
Okay, and then you get to Calcutta.
Yep.
What happens at that point?
Well, of course, there you again, we get off and we're putting in a holding camp. Now we are traveling what they call DEML, Detached Enlisted Men's List, which means when you get to a holding camp, anybody can grab you, because if they needed a radio operator, this was, hey, detached, so we can take him. But we're traveling as a group under OSS, but nobody could tell us. We couldn't tell. So our captain had a battle all the way along to keep us all together,
right,
to keep these guys from snatching us. And of course, you had to get over the hump. Now, you get over the hump, you fly or you drive. Well, in order to fly, you had to be rated have a certain priority in order to fly. Well, we couldn't get it because we weren't.
You didn't exist.
We didn't exist. So then notice came in that captain brought to us and said, we got 25 trucks and jeeps that have to drive the Burma Road. Shall we do it? We said, we sure will. So we all got ourselves a jeep or a truck. We carried ammunition. I pulled a 20 millimeter cannon behind me on the jeep, and so we drove the Burma Road. 100 miles a day, 1,200 mile trip took us. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What was that like as an experience? What did you see? What did you do?
And we saw road upon road upon road. We saw the Chinese or Burmese working on the road at the same time we were on the road. You couldn't go very fast, 100 miles a day, and that was a long day.
Yeah.
And we, of course, slept in the trucks along the way, or wherever you happened to end up. We decorated our jeeps with orchids, because they had a lot of orchid trees growing, or bushes, or whatever you call them, and we thought that was hilarious. We had one man get appendicitis, and so I was responsible for getting him to a hospital, and there were some mission hospitals up in the hills there in Burma. I would located one through an interpreter, and we drove him with 2 jeeps and about 5 rifles, and drove him up to the hospital, dumped him there, left him where he couldn't do anything, and hopefully he'd find his way out. And we went back and continued on, and we never did see him again. So I suppose he was connected with some army outfit that happened to be passing through.
Right.
When he was better. So.
Now, were you seeing much by way of other army outfits along there?
No, just occasionally. I only remember one army outfit that had a mess tent set up, and we ate with them at one time, and that was all. I don't know what group they were, or whether they were engineers or what.
Did you see engineers working on the road as you went along?
Just the local labor.
Okay.
But I suppose it was led by an engineer or something.
And I guess at that point it's kind of maintenance of the road rather than building
Maintenance
it.
of the road, right? And they
on.
carried it all by hand or by pogo stick or the baskets,
Right.
Yeah. And then we got to the Salween River Bridge, which is no longer called the Salween River. The computer calls it something else. But anyway, that's the bridge that connected, I guess, India with Burma, or Burma with China.
Burma with China, yeah.
Burma with China, okay, so we crossed that. That was an interesting crossing, because it was a single span bridge. And when you drive a truck into it, it's almost like pushing meat through a sausage skin. It's kind of work its way down. It was in there, one vehicle at a time, so it took us a long time to pass over that area. And that was eventful in a sense. And then of course we drove out. It becomes humdrum after a while.
Mhm.
1,200 miles of the hairpin turns, and we finally arrived at Kunming,
Mm-hmm.
and we're.
All right. Now, what was Kunming like at that point?
Kunming was a typical dirty Chinese city where the sewage was in the streets and the kids were playing in the street and they would defecate in the street, and it was just a dirty place full of flies and full of other bugs and etc. They had I don't think it was called a USO club, but it was some club where you could go in, and that was interesting because they had various drinks and cooling fans that were of interest. But that was it. The local restaurants were strictly Chinese, and you didn't order chop suey because they didn't know what chop suey was, right? But a lot of egg and pork, and we didn't get into town too often.
Now, how long did you stay in that area, or did they ship you out someplace else?
We just north of town, probably half a dozen miles, to a compound. I don't think it was. It was a city, but I don't know the name of the city was. But there was a compound there, which we had medical facilities, barracks, and a parade ground, and we fixed up a rifle range out of a cemetery, and we had a field nearby where we could had C-47. We did our jump training,
Right.
but we trained the Chinese in weaponry and parachuting, and that was an experience in itself, because the Chinese were very muscular from the hips down, but not from the waist up, and so we furnished them with the old Enfield 03 30-06 rather, bolt action rifle.
World
from the
War I
First
type
World-
weapon, yeah.
From the First World War, right. We cleaned constantly and that stuff. I can't stand it. And we cleaned them all up for them, and that's the weapon they used, but their arms were not as long as ours, so it was interesting that they could hardly reach the trigger or hold the guard, and when they shot the rifle in a sitting position, we used to laugh at that because it knocked them right back on their backs. Doing. So we also want to sit them in the squatting position because we like to see them fall. Rather sadistic, isn't it?
So basically, your assignment at that point was to train Chinese paratroopers? Was
That's
that?
right.
All right. And did you give them...
Paratroopers and commandos. They called them commandos, but they had the parachute training as well, right? And that we had 181 in our group that went with us, and 12 Americans that parachuted into China, about 600 miles.
All right. So you actually do get a combat assignment once you get there. You're not just training. They then send
That's
you
right.
to action.
We get a combat assignment. The combat assignment was to make sure that the Japanese do not take rice out of China. They're bringing it back to the homeland.
Right.
Right. So that was the object, is to make sure that they didn't take anything out. Now we jumped in China. Of course, you could tell we weren't Chinese because we weren't their size and we weren't their color, and we couldn't speak Chinese.
Right.
But we had interpreters. I had a medical student as my interpreter, so he was helpful. And we had probably half a dozen interpreters, so we had, most of them were two per man,
Right.
American. And we stayed in a Buddha temple, which was our home base, and worked out from there.
Do you have any idea what part of China you were in at the time?
We were in the rice, in the breadbasket of China, Paoqing, Hanyang, Changsha rice triangle.
Okay.
Okay, and Hanyang is where we came out of. Hanyang was down here on the river. Changsha and Paoqing. I have a map of it down there that I made. Okay, so that's where we were located, and we fought the Japanese at the city called Litsitsin, which was probably a 10-mile walk through rice paddies to get there. They didn't have roads, of course, obviously. So, and that's where we had 2 of our men wounded, and carried them back to the Buddha temple, and then we moved from there because we figured we were vulnerable at that point. So we moved to another city, and they flew a C-47 in. No, a Piper Cub. They flew a Piper Cub in and took out both of the men in litters,
Right.
attached outside the plane. But a 600-mile trip, I guess they must have had many of wing tanks and et cetera to furnish this little Piper with enough fuel. So
Now, did you actually see much of the Japanese, or just in those couple occasions when you fought?
just when we were fighting them, that was it. They knew where we were, but I didn't. Why they attacked? I'm surprised that I got out of there. Why they didn't attack us is beyond me.
Because the Japanese did do some offensives in China relatively late in the war.
Yeah.
Part of it was to try to push the American air bases back.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure where you would have been physically relative. You probably would have been in the rear areas, and maybe the main combat troops, if they were there, were.
Well, I think more
ahead of you.
they were along the coast,
Yeah.
weren't they?
Well, they were pushing inland to try to push them back.
But we were quite a ways
But
in.
you were maybe in the middle.
We were, yeah. Well, in that area, I think we were right in the middle of that, right in the middle of that rice basket,
Right.
anyway. And so we were probably far enough away from them, but we didn't. There was only one encounter, and then of course the war stopped, and then we couldn't believe that when the news came on the radio that the war was over. We said, "Oh, hot dog! What does that mean?" And they said,
All
"Well,
right,
don't worry,
this-
you're going to stay there for another 30 minutes or 30 days."
Okay, because I am now. Okay, we got to the point in your story where you had gotten the news that the war ended. Did you find out over the radio? Was that?
Yeah, we found out by radio, right?
Okay.
That,
And then how much of a transition was there between the time you heard that and when you could feel like there wasn't a war going on anymore?
well, it was about 30 days because we were told to stay in 30 days. Our war was not going to end when the end of the World War. So we had to stay there 30 days because now we have the communists are taking over China. Their mutual enemy, the Japanese, are done, so the communists are taking over. Well, now we've got communist problem. We have warlords that had little groups of people that all wanted our weapons,
Right.
and we had Nationalist Chinese Army who wanted our weapons. So we were stuck.
But you were in the Nationalist Chinese Army, or at least were the. Now the
We
the paratroopers who were with you, were they going to stick with you, or?
Well, half of them were commies, I think. So when the red flag went up, I suppose they all wanted to do their own thing. So when we did finally get back to Hanyang, and at that point, then we were supposed to be instrumental in taking the surrender of the troops in that area, but they all had their own weapons. But it was at that point, with those that had gone back already, there was about 8 of us left, 8 of us Americans. Wow, shoot, you know, it was always ridiculous.
Yeah.
But we were supposed to negotiate the surrender of that. So Captain Cook was in on that, I suppose, but I don't think any arms were laid down, and we were just kind of milling around in the area. I had all my medical equipment, and I had to get rid of that. Now the only thing is the alcohol with the thing that we had to get rid of. We didn't want that in the hands of the Chinese. So the rest of the medical supplies I turned over to to who were supposedly doctors or etc. With interpreting from my interpreter to what happened. So anyway, we had to get rid of all the alcohol. You gonna get it?
You did?
Gonna get it, Gene? Yeah.
Okay.
So we had disposed of all that, and then there's a few places I went by Sanpan with the interpreter to visit some sick. And one woman I remember in particular, she must have had cancer in her throat, and she could hardly speak, and she looked like she was cancerous. I gave her some aspirin. She thought it was a godsend. But what can you do, you know, for something like that? You do what you can, and you think you're supposed to be the heal-all, and you can't. So, but anyway, before we went in, all these Chinese had to be put in in physical shape that would be conducive to fighting a war.
Right.
So teeth had to be pulled, and I think we pulled about 200 teeth in one day. I'd go down with a Novocaine, shoot all the people. Doc would come behind with the pliers and pull everything out, and we'd go, people would, but that helped their physical condition. Some of them, when we got into China, I discovered had worms, and I had some worm treatment material there, and I probably took care of about 20 of them that had worms, and it cleared that up too. But there was a lot of little things that happened. Their physical condition was not good.
So these were not necessarily elite troops already.
They were supposed to be elite troops, right? These were supposed to be the cream of the Chinese Nationalist Army, but they still didn't have their method of treating a headache was to go like this until you had a whole ring of red around here. And what's the reason for that? Well, they won't think of their headache if they feel the pain around their neck. Well, I tell you, if you want headache, you want aspirin, you don't come here with the rings around your neck, because I won't treat you if you're gonna use that old superstition. So they had a headache, I gave them an aspirin, but rings around your neck, and they would come with big red blotches all around their neck. That was their interpretation of a thing. Maybe it was all right, but it didn't look good to me.
Right. Now, did they have officers with their group?
They had officers with their group, right?
Were those? What did you think of them as opposed to the soldiers?
Well, I would say their officers were probably educated to some degree, but as far as drive is concerned, no, they didn't have the fight that you'd expect from elite troops. That was my interpretation, I guess, of the whole thing. But
when you actually fought the Japanese, I mean, what would they do, or how did they go about it?
Well, as Captain Cook said, I had to put a gun to his head to get him to go to the front, and that was it. When we got in and planned this, we marched, of course, down to this city of Lizitzen, when our plan was to attack the Jap installation there. And so we got there early in the morning, and the Chinese commandos were supposed to take the frontal approach with us. Well, the Nationalist Army was supposed to flank us, and the guerrillas were supposed to flank the other side. Well, all the time we were fighting, the Nationalists were up in the hill watching us. And we're supposed to be taking the frontal approach. And actually, there was only about 12 fighting men in the whole group, and that was the Americans. The Chinese, even though they lost about 20 of them, were almost of no value. That's how we got 2 of our men wounded, because we had to take a pillbox. It had a machine gun in it. In order to take the pillbox, you couldn't get the Chinese would lift their head up over the hill we'd be behind, and they'd get shot by a sniper. So they weren't really keen about running out in front there and yelling, charge, so Roy Gallant was our submachine gunner, and he was given the assignment by Lieutenant Drew, and Lieutenant Drew always said after that, I'm sorry I had to tell him to do that. But anyway, he told Roy Gallant to go out and take that pillbox with a couple of grenades. So, put a new clip in his machine gun, and snuck down there with Hob Miller, and he laid the first grenade within the slot, and he was going to make sure that it was a killing grenade, so he dropped another one in there, and that's when he got shot. Let's see, it was right in this muscle here. It was just below the subclavian artery. If he'd have severed that, he'd have bled to death. But anyway, he got that just below the subclavian artery, and so he had a big hole in his back, but he was able to walk back to our bivouac. He was a lumberjack before the war, and tougher than rawhide. He had shoulders like this, And Hob Miller got shot right through the abdomen, and it came out of passed through his lung, out of his back, and he was in bad shape. And those are the two that we sent back.
Now, did you actually manage to take the town? Did the Japanese leave, or did you
No,
leave?
no, we left.
Mm-hmm.
We left because it was impossible. We were alone.
Right.
What do you do with 12 men that's actually doing the fighting,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and 200 or 181 Chinese who don't want to do anything, and a whole company, regiment, or battalion, or whatever it was up on the hill watching us, of the Nationalists. You know, so you're alone.
Yeah.
So what do? You leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, how do they actually get you out of there in the end?
By the same way we came back, we came in. We went through the rice paddies and down, well, that little path between rice paddies. We followed those, and we just left.
And did you eventually? Did they fly you out of it somewhere? Or?
Okay, how do we get out of there?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant out of that.
Yeah, no, all the way out of there.
Okay, after we got to Hanyang, then there's an airfield there, and they brought in a big C-54, and that's how we got out. Right.
All right. Now, once you got out of there, what did you do next?
Well, of course, Harry Truman disbanded the OSS while we were in there. You know, right after the war ended, he disbanded OSS. That's enough of OSS, he said. So we're in there without anything. We don't have a company. We don't have. We're being of non-existent. We were non-existent, is right. So we didn't exist at all. But when we got back to Algiers by C-47 or C-54 rather, and the big one, and then we just packed up. We were then, I suppose, back in the Army again, and but we stayed as a unit, and got on a ship out of Calcutta. I came in Seattle, Washington. Yep, took a train back to Congressional Country Club, and we were discharged from there.
All right. Now, once you're out of there, then you go back to Michigan at that point?
Oh yeah,
All right.
I came home. It's interesting. I told Mother when I was home on furlough, I'll be back Christmas Eve, and I got home at 11 o'clock Christmas Eve. Or Christmas Day rather. Christmas Day. It was 11 o'clock Christmas Day that I got home, which I thought was pretty good.
All right.
Yeah.
And then once you were back home, what did you do then?
Well, I went to JC, or CC it's called now. Yeah, I went to JC for 2 years, and then of course I'd married her in between time. So I thought, well, I better get a job. So I went to work for Oliver Machinery Company, and was there 6 years, and then I finally got a job as office manager at Doyle Vacuum Cleaner Company, and then I went with beauty supplies, wholesale beauty supply sales. So I was in that for 40-some years.
All right. To look back on the whole thing now, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you?
Oh, well, I think I grew up, of course. I went in as a boy, came out as a man. You can't help it that, you know, and my whole interpretation, I guess, was changed. You become adult. Nothing childish is interesting anymore, right? And that's why when I met her, it was perfect, because she was adult too, and we just hit it off. And matter of fact, she was my next door neighbor, which I didn't know at the time I was home. And so, yeah, I married the next door neighbor. Married the neighbor girl.
There you
Does
go.
that sound romantic?
All right. Do you think you see the world differently than you would have otherwise?
Yeah, well, you finally see the world.
Yeah.
You know, we were an isolationist country before the war. And, you know, they let the Germans, let the Europeans kill themselves. We aren't going to get involved in that. But now, you become, after you come back, you travel the world, and now you see the whole world, and you see the problems that exist there that we don't want here, and things like that, you know.
Well, having kind of been out in East Asia and so forth there, particularly at the end of the war, it has got to the point where you had things like the Chinese Revolution going on and the Korean War and so forth, and the Americans were getting or not getting entangled in those things. did you have opinions about that? Did you think we should have been doing more or less at the time, or just stay away from all of it, or?
Well, there you go. Now you're touching on a subject of freedoms, and these people are entitled to freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a country that is familiar with freedoms, it's us. And if we should help someone out to become
Mm-hmm.
free, I think we should. Unfortunately, they don't play the same game we do,
Mm-hmm.
and their interpretation of war is different than ours. I guess that's what I mentioned that in that article in the advance that you turn it off. I can't think.
Okay.
I can't. Yeah.
All right. That's fine.
Well, shoot, I wanted to say it and I can't. Must be my age.
Oh, that's hard.
Don't worry. Someday you will be old.
I'm planning on it. So, okay. Is there any other kind of individual memories or things that stick with you from your time in the service? Things you kind of think back to that you haven't mentioned here in this interview yet?
Well, there probably are, but I'm not certain. It's something important, something
So,
significant.
just something distinctive or that
Something
tends to stick
distinctive.
with you. I mean, whether it was silly or very small or.
Yeah. No, I don't. I can't. I can't think of. Well, I suppose I suppose I could think of some things. Playing ball at the hospital in Fort well, it was Fort Sam Houston, what it was,
Mm-hmm.
Army Hospital. One of the guys in the group that we were going through nurses training, scrub nurse training, the batter hit the ball, the bat went out of his hand and it hit the guy in the frontal sinus.
Mm-hmm.
So of course it crushed it.
Yeah.
So we all hauled him to the hospital. I scrubbed up and I helped put the plate in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was significant. Never saw the guy again. I suppose he was discharged because
Mm-hmm.
now he'd become defective material.
Right.
So, what other significance? I don't know. I guess parachuting was quite the thing. But hey, you accepted that too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When you're young, you're invincible.
Right.
You can do anything, and it's all in the course of a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's like eating ice cream.
All right then. Well, thanks for taking out the time to talk to me.
Okay,
today.
I hope I've covered all the bases.
Done fine.
If you're happy,
All right.
then I guess we're happy.
That's amazing.